Chapter 1: Strained Relationship with His First Wife. I remember when I first met Hilda. She was intelligent, strong-willed, and deeply committed to the cause, just like me, or so I thought at the time. She was Peruvian, an economist, someone who understood the world in a way that not many could. We shared ideas, we shared dreams, and for a moment, it seemed like we could build something together. But I soon realized how little I could give her in return for all that she was willing to invest in me. I was consumed, you see. The revolution, the struggle for the oppressed, it had me, body and soul. The urgency of the moment, the feeling of every hour, every breath, being tied to something larger than life itself, it didn't leave space for much else. Not for love, not for family. Not for Hilda. There were moments when I thought we could still make it work, moments when I promised myself I would give more. But each time, the revolution pulled me back. It didn't matter if it was her pain, her loneliness, her cries in the middle of the night, it all seemed so distant. There was always another meeting, another plan, another step in the long road toward liberation. How could I have known how much she needed me? How could I have known that, despite all her understanding, she would eventually break? I betrayed her, not just with other women, but with my own absence. I was never truly there, not in the way a man should be. What good is a man who isn't present? What good is a man who talks about justice, but leaves the one who loves him to bear the weight of his neglect? She felt it, of course. I could see it in her eyes when I would return, tired, lost in thoughts of guerrillas and revolutions. The distance between us grew, little by little, like a gap I couldn't cross no matter how hard I tried. Her voice, once so strong and commanding, became quieter, more distant, until one day it was gone altogether. We divorced. A decision that, looking back, was inevitable. How could she have stayed with someone who was so far gone? How could I have asked her to wait while I fought battles in places far from her heart? She deserved more. She deserved a man who could see her, who could be with her. But that man was never me. I don't blame her for leaving. If anything, I understand. The revolution was my mistress, and it took everything. I gave her everything, but in doing so, I left behind the woman who had once believed in me. It was a lesson, painful and hard-earned. The battle for freedom is a noble one, yes. But it comes at a cost. And sometimes, that cost is the very thing you love most. Chapter 2: Separation from his family. I remember their faces, my children, but they were fading, slipping away in my mind with every mile I traveled. I left them behind, in Cuba, as I set off to wage war in distant lands. I left them behind in the name of something greater, something I believed could free millions, something that would reshape the world. But in that journey, I failed to see what I was losing, what I had already lost. The revolution consumed me. It always did. The world was burning, and I was burning with it. Africa called to me, Bolivia beckoned, and the fight, the never-ending struggle for justice, demanded my presence more than any embrace, more than any tender voice calling my name. I thought I was doing it for them, too, so they could live in a world free from tyranny, so their future could be filled with hope instead of oppression. But there's no redemption in a future if you can't even be there to witness it. They were so young, my children, and I wasn't there. I missed their first words, their first steps, their little victories and their pains. I wasn't there for their questions, the times they must have needed their father. I was lost in the wilderness of a revolution, believing that if I fought hard enough, if I bled enough, they would one day understand. But what kind of father doesn't even know the sound of his own child's voice when they need him? The letters came, cold, short, distant, and I would hold them in my hands, reading them with guilt clawing at my chest. My family, my flesh and blood, were becoming strangers, their lives unfolding without me. What good is a man who sacrifices everything, yet finds himself forgotten by those he loves? What was the point of freeing the world if I couldn't even free my own heart? They asked me, you know. I could see it in their letters, in the silence they sent me, in the spaces between the words. Why aren't you here, Papa? They didn't say it outright, but I felt it every time. And I didn't have the answer. How could I? What could I say? That I was off to fight for them, for their future? How foolish it sounds now. The truth was, I was a soldier of revolution, but a stranger to my own blood. In the end, I know what I did, and I know what it cost me. I sacrificed my family for something larger, for an idea that, in the end, demanded too much. And now, as I stand here, far from the world I once fought to create, I wonder if they ever knew how much I loved them. How much I still do, even from this far distance. But the truth is, love is something you can't simply fight for from afar. It's something you live. And I failed them in the living. Chapter 3, Health Struggles. Asthma. It's a word that followed me like a shadow, from the moment I took my first breath. I was a sickly child, always gasping for air, always fighting just to breathe. I remember lying awake at night, my chest tight, the weight of it pressing down on me as if the world itself was trying to crush me. I've nearly died from it more times than I can count, each time, the air escaping from my lungs, leaving me helpless, unable to move, my body weak. It should have been a curse, but it didn't stop me. It never did. From a young age, I was determined to fight it. I pushed myself harder than any child should have to. I learned to swim to strengthen my lungs. I ran to build endurance. Every time I had an attack, every time my body betrayed me, I forced myself to rise again, to fight back against the weakness. That's where the revolution began, inside that struggle to breathe, to live, to not let the world define me by my limitations. I would show them. I would prove that nothing could hold me down. But you see, when you carry a burden like asthma, it doesn't just fade away. It doesn't vanish when you leave your childhood behind. As an adult, as a revolutionary, it became my constant companion, always there, lurking, waiting to remind me of how fragile I was, how human. In the jungles of Cuba, during our guerrilla campaigns, it would hit me when I least expected it. The damp, thick air would suffocate me, the harsh conditions would set it off, and I'd be lying there, gasping, knowing that my comrades needed me, and yet there was nothing I could do. I'd fight, claw at the air, struggle to stay on my feet, but the attacks were relentless, and they came at the worst possible moments. The harshness of the terrain, the heat, the exhaustion, it made it worse, and the more I pushed myself, the more I hurt. But what choice did I have? To stop, to give in, was to be weak. And weakness, in a guerrilla war, was a luxury I could not afford. I was leading men into battle, fighting for ideals larger than myself, and yet, here I was, unable to breathe, unable to keep up at times. It was a battle within me, a battle no one saw. The pain, the difficulty, the humiliation of having to stop when everyone else kept going, it was a private war that tore at my spirit, even as I fought to hide it. I remember one time in the Bolivian mountains, the cold creeping into my bones, the altitude suffocating me. My chest was tight, my breaths shallow, and I could barely move. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them see me falter. There was no room for weakness, not when I was leading men who depended on me. So I kept going, each step a struggle, each breath a battle. The pain, the suffocation, it was as if my body was at war with my mind, and yet my mind refused to relent. It drove me forward, even as my body screamed in agony. I pushed through it all, every attack, every breathless moment, because I believed in the cause. But looking back, I see the price I paid. The asthma was never just a medical condition. It was a part of me, a constant reminder of my own limitations, even as I tried to transcend them. It shaped the way I viewed the world, the way I saw myself. If I could conquer this, if I could conquer my own weakness, I believed I could conquer anything. But in the end, no one can outrun their own body forever. And sometimes, it doesn't matter how hard you fight. You're still left gasping for air. Chapter 4: Execution of Former Comrades. There are moments in history when decisions must be made, not out of desire, but out of necessity. And I remember those moments, each one like a wound I couldn't heal, but had no choice but to accept. It was after the revolution, when the dust settled, and we were left with the task of rebuilding what we had fought for, this new world, this new Cuba, this hope that had so many names, so many faces. But revolution isn't kind. It's not clean, it's not easy. It's messy, and it demands sacrifices, sacrifices that are often harder to make than the battles that came before. I didn't ask for the responsibility, but it was mine nonetheless. And in those moments when we had to defend our victory, we couldn't afford weakness. We couldn't afford betrayal. I had seen the faces of those who had fought beside us, the comrades who had shared in the blood, the sweat, the pain of the struggle. And yet, some of them turned. They betrayed the very principles we fought for. The revolution, the people's hopes, were too sacred to allow that to stand. And so, we acted. We had to. The tribunals, the executions, they were not born from anger, but from the cold, hard knowledge that if we did not make an example of these men, the revolution itself would falter. But I won't lie to you, it was never easy. To sit there, to listen to the testimonies, to make that final decision, to sentence a man, a former comrade, to death, it tore at me. These were not just enemies. These were men I had fought alongside, men who had bled with me. How could I not feel the weight of their betrayal? How could I not question myself as I gave the order, as I watched the very men who had once stood beside me fall? The revolution had to survive, and its purity had to be protected. The ideals we fought for, the ones that brought us victory, were not to be tainted. And in the end, I did what I believed had to be done. But that doesn't mean it didn't haunt me. That doesn't mean it didn't break something inside me, something that could never be repaired. Each death felt like a part of my soul being torn away. It's easy to look back now and call me a murderer, a fanatic, a man with blood on his hands. And perhaps I am all those things. But in that moment, I was just a man with a duty to the revolution, to the people, to the ideals that had sustained me. The same ideals that had turned comrades into traitors. The revolution demands loyalty, and it punishes betrayal. There's no room for sentiment when you're standing at the edge of history. And yet, I wonder, what did we really win? What did we sacrifice, not just in the lives of our enemies, but in the lives of those we were supposed to save? We wanted to build a just world, but how just can a world be when it's built on such blood? Maybe one day, history will judge me differently. Maybe the revolution will be seen for what it truly was. But as I stand here, I carry the weight of those decisions that, in the heat of the moment, seemed right, but now, I can't help but wonder if the cost was worth it.